Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's series of presentation anchored by the Animal Welfare Group Nigeria, AWGN. Our mission is to increase awareness in animal behavior and welfare in Nigeria and other African countries, to foster collaboration and networking among animal behavior researchers in Nigeria, Africa, and all over the world. And finally, to educate the public and stakeholders, especially those involved in the animal food chain, on the importance of animal welfare. You can follow us on Twitter at AWGN14. We have our Facebook page, Animal Welfare Group Nigeria, and our LinkedIn page, Animal Welfare Group Nigeria. I'm the host, Dr. Yasiri from the Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta, Department of Animal Physiology. So I'll hand over to our moderator for today's session, Mr. Valentine Obiasugu, to introduce our presenter for today's session. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry for using that very sort of informal form of greeting, but I intentionally did that because of different time zones, so I do not end up saying good afternoon to someone in the morning. Welcome to the seventh in all the series of this presentation of the Animal Welfare Group Nigeria. Today we'll be having Dr. Rebecca Nordquist, and truly a visiting scholar at Utrecht University. I had my bachelor's and master's degree at the University of Utrecht. And to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Nordquist is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, Utrecht University. Our research covers aspects of cognition and emotion in farm animals, both from the perspective of farm animal welfare and the perspective of the potential of these animals in models of human disease. She has developed and validated behavioral tests for testing, learning, and emotionality in both pigs and chickens. Some of our current projects include assessing learning and memory in pigs and chickens, examining the effect of early environmental and nutritional challenges in pigs and chicken behavior, and the effect of environmental and developmental challenges on chicken neurobiology, both in ovo and during early life. She regularly collaborates with industrial partners in her research and is active in addressing the lay public through mainstream and social media. So I have a very quick question with that last paragraph, but until then, over to you, Dr. Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be part of this series. You have you've had a very nice lineup, and I gather there are more coming. And I'm very happy to be able to talk to you in this way and to share my research. And I hope that it will be of interest to you. I'm going to try to share my screen. Please let me know if that works. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, very good. So today I'm going to be talking about early life management and the effects of our management processes and the way that we manage farm animals in pigs and in poultry. As this nice introduction mentioned, I work at the Division of Animals in Science and Society at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, where we train veterinarians at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. To start out with, I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that people tend to perceive cognition in farm animals. And there are differences. I work with pigs and with poultry, and people tend to approach them differently. So people have an opinion of pigs as lazy, hanging around in the mud, or eating like a pig, so eating all kinds of too much of unhealthy things. Or they have an opinion that was formed a lot by reading a book called Animal Farm, which many of us had to read as students, in which the animals the pigs are the smartest on the farm. So many people recognize that pigs are intelligent, but they also have this view of pigs as sloppy or dirty, or that's part of the public perception. Chickens, on the other hand, people tend to regard chickens as stupid. People tend to look at chickens as not being very intelligent, not being able to make decisions, or not having very strong cognitive capacities. Being called a bird brain is generally an insult. And so people tend to regard chickens as just not very smart. So these two things both affect the way that we talk about animals and the way that the public perceives the importance or the possibility of cognition in farm animals. This is also something that was sort of touched on in the talk 2 weeks ago by Zhao when talking about fish, that there are a lot of ethical things that, particularly when talking about animals that look a little less like people or a little further away from people, like fish or like chickens, that people tend to recognize less that they have complex abilities. So why do we study emotion and cognition and neurobiology, so the development of the brain, in farm animals? Well, this is all part of a concept surrounding animal welfare. Why, I get the question a lot, why bother studying how intelligent animals are that live on farms? You know, maybe it's better, sometimes people say, that they're not very intelligent because, well, if they're not very intelligent, then they're not being bored by the lack of opportunity to show their intelligence on a farm. Now, there are a couple different reasons why it's important. The first is practical. So animals have to be able to deal with the farms as we have made them. They're becoming increasingly complex. So you get more group housing, which means that animals need to be able to find their way around. They need to be able to find their way to food. They need to be able to recognize other animals within the group and know where in the hierarchy they are. There's also an ethical reason why this is important. So intelligence and cognition is part of the intrinsic value of animals. Intrinsic value is a concept that we can put value on animals in terms of money. With farm animals, that's very easy. You can say a pig costs this much at the market today. So it has a monetary value. It can also have value to humans as a pet or as a companion, or as being, cows are often seen as nice part of the landscape, or sheep. But they also have value just because they are living beings, just because they are animals, and which makes them individuals that we need to respect. And intelligence is part of that. So if we're doing things with our management processes that are causing the animals to be less intelligent or not able to use their intelligence, then we're damaging their intrinsic value. And finally, there's the concept of that understanding more about the emotion and cognition in animals will give us a better understanding of the animals, and that will create more empathy. Now, this is complicated because it raises the questions: if an animal is somehow less intelligent, does that mean that we should have less empathy and less feeling towards this animal? I still strongly feel that it is important that we understand their intelligence and cognitive abilities, and that even understanding the limitations, so some of them being more able to solve different tasks, will create more empathy in people and make us more willing to work within the management systems we have to improve them for animals. In general, I also feel that there are probably really not going to be any animals that are not intelligent in their own way. If an animal has been intelligent enough to survive in evolution, then it probably has some sort of intelligence on its own. The reason we look at this in farm animals at Utrecht University is that we would like to identify welfare issues based on scientific evidence rather than gut feelings. This is because we feel that it's important, among other things, that policies regarding animals are also made based on scientific evidence. So sometimes policies are put into place that in reality may not really improve the lives of animals, but just look like it on the outside. Well, meanwhile, they're costing farmers lots of money and not actually improving things, while maybe some other improvements would improve lives of animals, but are just not investigated well enough to show that they do. So the idea is to improve the animals' lives by changing the long-term effects of management and breeding practices. So what do neuroanatomy and behavior have to do with these? Well, my research focuses on measuring animals at an individual level. So really looking at the animal as an individual on a farm and how it is coping with the farm as it is. So not group level measures or farm level measures, which are useful, but not the focus of my research. So there are different ways that you can look at that, different potential kinds of measures. You can look at the physiology, things like hormone levels, respiratory rates, heart rates. You can look at behavior, spontaneous behaviors, learned behaviors, pathological behaviors like stereotypies and damaging other animals. You can look at the brain, things like neuroanatomy, microdialysis, or imaging. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about learned behaviors, cognition, and about neuroanatomy. We also do research covering hormone levels and some spontaneous behaviors, but I'm going to focus today on learning and on neuroanatomy. So talking about cognitive testing in farm animals, when I started in 2008 at the current place that I am, which is, oh goodness, now 13 years ago, cognitive testing in farm animals was done a bit. There are other groups working in this area, but not very many. And the groups that were working in this area tended to, the research tended to be not very focused. So tests would be developed, used once, and abandoned. And then another question would come and another test would be developed that is completely different and would be used and then abandoned. I felt that it was important to put together a test that we knew what we were actually measuring. So that's the idea of test validity. So am I measuring actually what I want to measure? And it also needed to be reliable so that I could run the same test several times and other people could also run this test and that we could still know that we're still measuring the same thing that we want to measure in terms of cognitive ability of the animals. It also has to be practical, of course. So can I do the kind of test I designed? What we came up with, among other things, we've developed a number of different tests, was the whole board test in pigs. I'm using the example of the whole board today for both pigs and for chickens. I'll start out talking about pigs. So what does this measure? The validity of the test. It measures spatial working memory. So for the pigs, it tells us for short-term memory, where have you already been during the trial that you're tested in? So on the same day. And for long-term memory, where are rewards always found? The idea is that there are 16 potential places where the pigs could find a reward. That was a chocolate candy, an M&M. They really like those. There are only 4 places where the reward actually is. I'll show a video in a second that makes this a little more clear. And they had to learn, remember from trial to trial, where these rewards were located. We also measured behavioral flexibility. So what if we change the place where those 4 rewards are located? So they were located at first one place and then we moved them to another place. How long does it take them to figure it out? Now, for this test, this is where practicality comes in. It's an extremely large test setup. So it's 7 by 7 meters. So in order to be able to run this, we needed to have that much space available. We were fortunate that we do have that much space available. So that was the setup that we built. Here we have a video, and I don't know, this is extremely loud for me. I am sorry. There we go. Turn down the video. Here you see a pig in our setup. He's searching for the rewards that are in the bowls that you see that are covered by balls. And 4 of these 16 places have rewards. And the pig has learned to come in, and each of these 4 places, it will find a reward. Now, there was no reward, so it lifted, it looked, nope, no reward, and moved on. This was actually, we also automated this, this task. So in the balls, there are magnets, and underneath the bowls, the gray bowls, are sensors. And those are all connected to a computer. So every time a ball is moved, the computer registers that the animal was there. We showed that this was reproducible. So we could show we could run this test multiple times in different kinds of animals. So we looked at conventional pigs and at Göttingen mini pigs. And we found that in different independent experiments that the control animals showed similar performance. So they learned the task. We also showed that the performance could be impaired by things that you would expect to impair cognition, so a pharmacological antagonist, piperidine, and iron deficiency, which is known to induce cognitive deficits, and that it's also improved by enriched housing. We also showed that there are no sex differences in animals in pre-puberty. I'll show you some of these results more in a minute. So now we had this test, and we knew that we could measure spatial cognition in pigs, and we wanted to look at the at what the effects of various management practices are on their intelligence, on their cognition. So we focus on the period around birth and the period around early life. In an intensively farmed pig, birth usually takes place in a farrowing crate, which is a small confined area, followed by a suckling period with a sow and litter mates, where they may be cross-fostered. So if a sow has too many piglets, then some of them will be taken and given to another sow, which can be very stressful. There's also... Yeah, thank you. There's also weaning, usually with mixing. So different litters will be mixed together. And early life on a farm can have all kinds of potential threats for piglets. Things like early weaning. So on a farm, piglets are weaned much earlier than they would be in nature. In the Netherlands, that is supposed to be around 4 weeks of age, but frequently also happens at 3 weeks of age. There can be painful manipulations like tail docking, castration, and things like that. Large litter size is an increasing problem in industrial intensive farming because sows have been bred to produce more and more piglets per litter. And just like any multiples, even twins in humans, the more that you put into a uterus, the smaller that the animals are when they come out. So large litter sizes lead to low birth weights, to long farrowing times, to competition for food, because by this point there are many more piglets than there are teats for a sow on a sow. And the long farrowing can also lead to first versus last born in a litter being very, very different, having different opportunity to get to food. We actually just this week had a paper accepted on differences between first and last born in a litter. There may be repeated mixing, including cross-fostering. And there's also a lack of rooting or foraging opportunities, which because usually they're held on concrete, on cement. And that means that there's no place for the pigs to root or to forage, which is a behavioral needs. And it also leads to iron shortages, because in nature, they would be getting iron from the dirt, from the ground, which is why pigs generally get an extra iron shot. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the experiments that we've done on low birth weights and on iron shortages. What we see is that early life adversity has long-lasting effects on cognition. So especially iron deficiency in early life in piglets leads to long-term memory deficits in adulthood, even after the piglets have been repleted. So that means even after the piglets have been given iron. So we had iron-depleted piglets that were given too little iron for the first four weeks of life. And then we gave them a standard diet, so they were given enough iron, and tested them from 8 weeks on. So they had they had a normal diet for 4 weeks before we tested them. And even though they were on the normal diet, we still see that the long-term memory, so the reference memory, is adversely affected by this iron deficiency. So on the long term, these animals show deficits in working memory or reference memory, long-term memory. Low birth weight, which happens with large litters, also shows various defects in spatial deficits in spatial learning. We show in this paper with this graph that there are deficits in long-term memory in low birth weight piglets. We've done a number of different experiments with piglets which are either a little bit low birth weight or extremely low birth weight, and we see differences in the results, but they all point to deficits in spatial learning, so spatial memory in low birth weight piglets. We also see that if you give the piglets positive experiences, you can increase their cognition. So enriched housing, we had pigs which were housed in either enriched or impoverished areas. So enriched was with rooting materials, there was more space, there were toys that were changed on a regular basis. Or compared to barren housing, which was just the legal requirements, which is basically a floor and a chain. And group housing. And what we see is that the animals that were raised in an enriched environment showed much better long-term memory than the animals raised in a non-enriched environment. Which you could also say, maybe we're calling this an enriched environment, but maybe the environment that we keep them in standard practice is actually an impoverished environment or a barren environment. We've also seen that early life adversity shows long-term effects on the neurobiology of pigs. So looking at their hippocampus, looking at the iron deficiency piglets, so this was the experiment where the animals were given an iron deficiency in early life and then tested. These animals, these brains were taken when they were about 4 months old. And we still see, even after that long, that there's a difference in the iron levels in the hippocampus in these animals. So even this early life deficiency has caused a long-term change in the brain development of these animals in the neurobiology. So early life adverse and positive effects in pigs can affect the way that they learn or they show learning in the spatial whole board. It can affect neurobiological development. But what about an animal that we have even more of? So we also looked at layer hens. I think most of you will be familiar with this, but I'm going to go through this quickly anyway. When we're talking about layer hens, we have different types of farms. So there are breeder farms, where the parent stock are kept, and they produce fertilized eggs. Hang on one second. I've lost my slide here. There we go. The eggs are then sent to a hatchery, And the hatchery then, when they're 1 day old, sends the chicks to a rearing farm where they're reared until they're 17 weeks old. And at 17 weeks, they're sent to a layer farm where they're producing eggs for consumption. Now, there are all kinds of potential threats on a farm to early life to chickens. Lack of maternal care or older chickens to learn from, crowding, transportation stress. So 1 day old chickens are transported, and they're also transported at 17 weeks of age, of course. There's a lack of space to learn about spatial cues and flight. There can be painful procedures like beak trimming. Sexing is also very traumatic for day-old chicks. Sorting, so depending upon how carefully that is done or how it's organized, can also be very traumatic to chicks. I'm going to talk today about some experiments that we've done looking at housing conditions at either aviary or caged animals and effects on later cognition, and looking at the neurobiology behind maternal care. So this was an experiment that I did together with Faye Tamtani and Andrew Jansek, who work at the Norwegian, at that time, Faye was a PhD student at the Norwegian Veterinary School. She's now at the SLU in Sweden, where they had this nice setup where they were able to, in a single facility, raise animals either in cages or in an aviary. So on the right, you see animals that are kept in cages that are not able to get out of the cages. And on the left, you see that the doors are open and the animals can go to the different levels of the aviary and explore. They were reared there until 16 weeks of age, and then they were taken to an experimental facility where they all got the same housing. The whole board test was run at 18 weeks of age. And this is what the whole board test for chickens looks like. Yes, there we have a chicken. You see, the chickens are not extremely fast. And we also ran the test with chickens with fewer rewards and places they could find rewards because, well, we thought, well, they are chickens. They may not be able to do this as well as pigs do it. In the end, I think that was probably not necessary. They probably would have done fine on 16, but we've kept it at 9, and 3 of these places are rewarded. What we see here, this is just to very quickly summarize these complicated graphs. What you see is looking at long-term memory after the reversal. So when we change the place where the rewards are located, we see that the caged reared animals are doing this worse than the aviary reared animals, which makes sense because the cage-reared animals have had less opportunity to use spatial cues and use spatial memory to explore their environment, while the aviary animals would have had more opportunity to go up and down and learn about spatial things. So being raised in a cage has negative effects on working memory following reversal. So housing conditions are important. But what about social inputs? So talking about how does a chicken get to be a chicken, which I know in this group is an important theme, especially for soon. Talking about maternal care. So chickens in intensive systems are raised usually in age homogeneous groups, so all the same age, with an all in, all out as the norm. So the day-old chicks will come and they'll all be within 12 hours the same age and be raised on the rearing farm altogether, which means that there's no maternal care for chickens or even older chickens to learn how to behave as a chicken. And we asked ourselves the question, what does maternal care do for chicken cognition and for its neurobiology? And the reason that there are no maternal care in intensive systems is that it is practically extremely difficult to actually put in mother hens for all kinds of reasons. One of them is that the layer breeds that are used in intensive systems don't really show maternal care anymore, so that would not be very useful. and for biosecurity, because you don't want older chickens bringing in diseases that would get to the younger chickens. So looking first at the behavior in chicks, we've published a couple of papers on this, and various authors before us have shown positive effects on maternal care on fear behaviors, but the effects are often small and inconsistent. In our lab, we showed very little effect of maternal care on behavioral tests in both fear and in cognition. I think that this probably has to do with a number of different things, but also because we are using chicks, which are from genetic breeds, which are used in intensive farming. And these chicks have been basically selected to, not on purpose, but chicks which thrive when they don't have maternal care. Because if they didn't, then they wouldn't be getting old enough to reproduce. So I think that the layer chicken lines that are used in intensive systems probably are not as responsive to maternal care as some of the other lines that that may be in use. For instance, like the Nigerian line, I would be interested to hear more about that. We did ask ourselves, okay, so we're not seeing very much behaviorally, but what do we see in brains following maternal care? Well, what we did actually see there is that even if we're not seeing very large behavioral effects, we do see that hen raising chicks changes neurobiology in adulthood. So this is from an experiment where we looked at chickens which were raised either with or without a hen. So we have a no hen and a hen group here from two different genetic lines. And what we see is that there are changes in lateralization of hippocampal cell size. And this has to do with the way that the brains are lateralized. And this was actually measured when the chickens were, I'm going to say 60 weeks of age, maybe 55. So very far into adulthood. They had not seen a mother hen in almost a year, maybe a little longer than almost a year. Before they were measured, before this was measured. So this is a very long lasting effect. What we also see is that there are changes in vasotocin in adult hens raised with or without a mother hen compared to other hens, compared to other chickens. We see changes in the vasotocin positive neurons in the medial preoptic area, which is an area in the hypothalamus, which has to do with social activities. So seeing a change there means that these animals may have more or less social adaptations in the way that their neurobiology has changed. So as I said, as a final experiment to explain, as I said, dark brooders are raising animals with adult hens present on the farm is just not a very practical alternative within intensive farming systems. Dark brooders may possibly be a way of mimicking some aspects of maternal care. So you see here a picture of these. These are a collaboration with Anja Brunschreiber at Utrecht University, where this is basically a warming area with little curtains on the side that you can put down and the chicks can huddle underneath it, which means that the chicks can have a dark place to be, which makes them feel safe. They can have a place where they can synchronize sleep, so they can all sleep at the same time. This is also a problem in intensive farming, that animals which are awake and asleep or trying to sleep are all together, which means they keep waking each other up. And this gives them, and this mimics some aspects of maternal care. Now, Anja showed in these experiments that dark brooders, that being reared with a dark brooder decreased fearfulness and feather pecking dramatically later in life. These were actually unexpected dramatic results on how much it decreased feather pecking. She had to stop the experiments before she was planning to, because the group that did not get dark brooder treatment had such rampant feather pecking and cannibalism, whereas the group that did have dark brooders were showing very little feather pecking. So we collected the brains, and what we saw was that there were age effects in the things that we in the hypothalamus and the AVT that we looked at, the vasotocin, but we didn't see any effects of being raised with or without a brooder. So this is in contrast to what we saw when being raised with an actual mother hen, which tells me that that while the brooder may mimic some aspects of maternal care, which are important and showing very important behavioral results, it's obviously not mimicking entirely what a chick will get from a mother hen, and at least not what is showing these changes in neurobiology. So to summarize, rearing is important for chickens. In housing conditions, we've shown in various, this is a summary that includes other experiments that I didn't talk about today, but undercrowded chicks show less fearful behavior during chicks which are raised in undercrowded conditions. Overcrowding produces increased corticosterone at later ages, and aviary raised birds, which is the experiment I told you about, show better working memory and reversal than cage-reared birds. Talking about maternal care, behaviorally, we see inconsistent results, but we see when raised with a chick that there are neurobiological changes that you can see on into adulthood. On the other hand, when being raised with a dark brooder, we don't see enough differences. We don't see the same kinds of differences in the chicks, even though they do show important behavioral differences. So to sum up here, talking about welfare, what do neuroanatomy and behavior have to do with welfare? Well, my take-home message here is that early life conditions can affect the neurobiology, cognition, and fear in both pigs and in chickens, and that different measures, behavior, looking at physiology, looking at brain, can react to different management practices. So there's no single measure that's going to tell you whether an animal has poor welfare or good welfare. They all tell you different things on this dimension. So I'd like to leave you with this picture, and thanks to everyone that I am currently and previously working with on these projects at Utrecht University and my collaborators at various other institutes. And thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Rebecca Nordquist. So the floor is now open for questions. And as I've said earlier, if you're just joining us, when you join the Zoom meeting, kindly switch off your camera and your microphone. And if you have further questions, kindly drop it on the chat box. So the first on the list of questions, I had actually wanted to start with my question, but I think I should make it the last one, is from Dr. Yasser. She's asking, how has domestication affected cognition of animals?
Very good question, and I would very much like to look at, for instance, the more older lines like the red jungle fowl in some of our setups. There are behavioral differences, and I would say it's likely that the less domesticated probably show more spatial learning and more intelligence or more cognitive capacities, but they also tend to be more fearful, which makes testing difficult. So I don't know. There are differences, and especially Per Jensen's group in Sweden has been looking at that extensively in terms of fear behaviors. But in terms of cognition, I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. And the second question is also coming from Dr. Yasser. She asked, what are the implications of housing system, both intensive and extensive, on animal cognition?
Well, that's a big question there. I think the various parts of intensive and extensive housing and farming systems can have different kinds of effects. I mean, I think that the maternal care and the lack of an animal to learn from, it may have more effects on social things than on cognition specifically. Looking at things like whether an animal has the space to move around and to learn about space and to learn how to use space, I think that that very much will affect the way and will affect its spatial cognition, and that's also what we're seeing. Not only in our experiments, but also in other experiments, that this is just very important. And just so many other possibilities for effects of intensive housing. Looking into the way that the animals are hatched is something that we're working on right now. Maeva Manet, one of my PhD students, is working on effects of different incubation procedures on cognition later on, and incubation is obviously also a very important part of intensive housing. Also looking at transportation of eggs, of fertilized eggs, whether that is important for cognitive development. So it's that's a big question, many possibilities there.
Thank you for the response. This is coming from Andre Putiora. I'm very sorry if I didn't use the most appropriate prefix. She's asking, he or she is asking, I'm very sorry, do you think that memory performance will be even greater in free-range birds or birds with outdoor access compared to birds kept in aviaries?
Assuming that they actually use the free range, yes, I think that is very possible. I don't know. It's something that I would like to investigate, but I think that is likely, that if they have more possibilities to use space, that that they will just develop that better. I think it's also important to do that from a young age, though.
Okay, thank you. Coming from Dr. Yasser, how can maternal care be stimulated in commercial poultry production system? And with the increase in advocates for free range, how will animal welfare be affected?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the most promising is the dark brooders, which could theoretically be used in intensive housing systems, in commercial poultry systems. I think there's just not really going to be a feasible way to introduce older chickens themselves without introducing too much potential for biosecurity issues. So I think it's important to look at aspects of maternal care and what we can, what the chicks need, also in terms of learning where food is and things like that, and how that can be stimulated more than it is at present. Talking about the free range and increase in advocates of free range, how animal welfare will be affected. Oh, I think that's probably a good thing. In terms of their cognition, I think it relates to the question on whether that will be important for their cognition. I think especially raising them in areas where they have more potential to explore will be important. Now, obviously, raising extremely young chickens in the outdoors is a difficult thing, because it's sort of asking for predator birds to come in and eat all of your chickens. That's always an issue when raising free range chickens, but certainly when they would, if you're going to be letting, very young chicks outdoors. I don't know if outdoors is necessarily necessary, but I do think complex environments, so where they can move around a lot and be at different levels and fly especially, are important for young chicks.
Thank you. The sixth in the Q&A section is also coming from Andre Putroya. Sorry again if I'm not using the most appropriate prefix. From what I know of feather pecking prevention, things like beak trimming and enrichment and dim lighting are readily used, but I've not heard of anything being used from such a young age. It's absolutely fascinating that raising chicks in dark brooders reduces feather pecking behavior. Could you postulate as to why this might be?
Well, really, this is more Anja Brinschreiber's research than mine. I was just connected to the research for the neurobiology, but my guess here would be that it has a lot to do with a reduced fearfulness. So she sees in various tests of fearfulness that animals raised with dark brooders show reduced fearfulness, and I think that may be because they have this protected area that they can go to. Because of the sleep synchronization, I think that's also very important. That's that the chicks are able to sleep when they want to sleep and not being climbed on by other chickens. And I think this all leads to reduced fearfulness, which probably also reduces feather pecking.
Okay, thank you for that response. Coming from Dr. Samuel Durosaro, did you check anything on the effect of selection for increased body weight on cognition?
Actually, we looked a little bit at the opposites. That's we looked at looking at broilers, so not layer hens, but we compared slow-growing to fast-growing broilers, and that's all relative. You know, the fast-growing broilers in which get up to slaughter weight at 5 weeks of age, and the slow-growing broilers, which are 7 or 8 weeks of age. But we didn't see a lot of cognitive differences there. We did see some differences in fear behavior, but we didn't see a lot of differences in terms of cognition. Honestly, though, we haven't done enough testing that I could say there are no differences. I think there may well be, but not in the few tests that we've done on it.
Okay, thank you. This is from Prof. Kring Watana. I'm sorry, Prof, not using your appropriate prefix. Have you done any work looking at early life environments and effect on cognition at different ages? When
No.
does it start?
Not specifically, and that's also a question that I would really like to be able to answer. We have run the whole board experiments at differing ages. We do see that the younger chickens tend to take longer to learn the whole board. So just as an ontological effect in terms of development, they probably are not developed enough in terms of cognition to do it at very early ages. But no, I don't know when the impairment starts. We usually focus on times either at the time a chicken would usually become a spent hen, so at the end of the lay period, or at the shift around 16 or 17 weeks of age. So we usually focus on one of those two.
Okay, thank you. And this is coming from James Bucky. I'm very sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name or using the most appropriate prefix. Can these studies be replicated in housed wild animals like primates? If yes, how can one come by such complicated and expensive experimental setup?
Housed wild animals, so I assume in like a zoo setting or a sanctuary setting. I don't have any experience with that. The person that would have the most experience with that, I think, is Faye Clark, who does a lot of cognitive research with primates in zoo settings. And I imagine they would be very expensive because primates are able to take just about everything apart. But what she does is she gives the primates various cognitive tasks, but not for like the whole day. So she gives it to them for a short amount of time, and then they can try to solve a task, and then she takes it away, in part to make sure that they don't destroy it while nobody is watching. But I don't know where she gets them. I think she builds them herself.
Okay, thank you. This is coming from Alex. Sorry if
Mhm.
I'm not properly.
100. I don't know how they're going to demonstrate. Actually,
Might be less responsive to maternal care.
Mhm.
What can be the limiting factor here, like strength of imprinting, time spent with hens, less effectiveness of maternal care?
Well, there could be all kinds of reasons for that, but I think that well, I think that there's a genetic difference here. I think that these chicks are that we've basically bred for sort of more independent chicks, which will have all kinds of other issues, but because they have been able to survive without the maternal care, they may respond to it less. I don't know exactly what the factor is behind that. It's an interesting question though, whether it's an imprinting thing or I don't think it's an effect of time spent with hens, because regardless of whether we show them hens or not, they still don't seem to be very responsive. And I also don't think it's effectiveness of maternal care, because even if we give them very dedicated maternal hens, so hens from strains which actually do show maternal care, they'll sit with the hen and they'll go under her feathers, and it will look like just like but we don't see the behavioral effects that one would expect. So we don't see the effects on fearfulness or the effects on other behavioral tests. I think it really has to do with the way that the chicks are responding to the maternal care.
Okay. This is coming from Dr. Yasser. Is there any cognitive difference between broiler and layer chick at early life? And I'll take two of our questions at the same time because we are running out of time. And native chickens reared extensively look for an appropriate nest site to lay their eggs. Do you think they show consistency over several laying periods?
To start with the first one, looking at broiler and layer chicks during early life, I don't know if there are differences. We haven't done that direct comparison between layers and broilers. It's also difficult to do that direct comparison because most behavioral tests, most cognitive tests, are dependent on movement, and obviously broilers are just less mobile. So they're less exploratory even at early ages than layer chicks. So I mean, I think there may be differences. I would not be surprised if the growth that is involved in broiler chicks just takes so much energy that it is at a cost to their cognitive capacity, so that the layer chicks would show more cognition, but I don't know. That's just an idea. And the last question about extensive rearing and hens looking for specific places to lay eggs. I think that's probably a question other people here could answer better than me, whether they consistently lay in the same places. I would not be surprised if a hen has found a safe place to lay an egg, that it goes back to the same, or to lay a clutch, that it goes back to the same place consistently. But I mean, I think other people here have more experience with extensive systems.
Okay, this is coming from Adekunle Sorunke. Sorry if I'm not using your appropriate prefix. Is there correlation between housing systems and feed conversion ratio, taking age into consideration?
I assume so. But I am not. But I am not an expert on food conversion ratios. I assume that feed conversion ratios in less extensive systems are better. So I assume that in intensive systems, food conversion ratios are higher. But that's not my expertise.
Okay, thank you. Last on the list of questions in the chat, it's coming from Prowl Kringwatana. I'm very sorry for if I'm not pronouncing the name correctly and using the most appropriate prefix. With regards to your finding in chicken neurobiology, could you please explain lateralization of cell size in
Hippocampus.
for behavioral cognition?
Okay. Well, lateralization is an important part of development for chickens. So brain lateralization in chickens has to do with, among other things, whether they're exposed to light in the egg. And what we see is that brain lateralization, the different parts of the brain are important for doing different tasks. So the idea is that if there is lateralization, that is probably better. So if there are differences between the two brain halves, then a brain is probably able to do different cognitive tasks better because it can show more flexibility.
Okay. Thank you very much for that response. For everyone, if you need the recordings of today, you can send an email to oyas.iyasere@gmail.com. So we just have 3 minutes left, and with that 3 minutes, I encourage everyone to kindly switch on your videos and switch on your mic. If you have any personal questions or collaboration or suggestion for Dr. Rebecca Nordquist, so you have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Valentine, for moderating today's session. And I also want to appreciate Rebecca for giving us a wonderful presentation on early life management and its effect on poultry and pig cognition. That was a wonderful one, an eye-opening research area for us here in Nigeria. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and thank you for joining our group. I really want to appreciate you. I also want to thank all participants for participating in today's event, and we have a few minutes more. If you have other comments for the presenter, you can indicate by raising your hands, please. Then you would say one or two things before we end today's program. If you have any comment for the presenter, you can indicate by raising your hands. You go to the reaction button and pick raise of hands.
So just a quick one, because I said I was going to ask that question, which I found out on Rebecca's, Dr. Rebecca's profile. How do you educate the lay public through mainstream and social media, and what kind of animal welfare or behavior related topics are you keenly interested in?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
I mean, how do you address the lay public through mainstream and social media, and what kind of topics related to animal welfare, behavior, cognition are you keenly interested in?
Well, in terms of, I think it's important to engage with the lay public on this, because I think it tells us a lot about the questions that are raised and important to people who are, in the end, the consumers, and the reason that we're producing all of this food. I think it's important to show people that animals are intelligent. I think I had a recent experience where I was in a setting like this, talking with school children, and one of them at the end of the conversation said, yes, now I know that animals are not brainless beings. And I thought, oh dear, did you think of that before? So I think it is important that we talk about these animals that we keep on farms, and that people really realize from a young age, because there is a lot of distance between most of the lay public and the animals that we eat.
Thank you.
Is there any other person that wants to give a comment? Any comments? So thank you very much, Rebecca, once again, and we really appreciate you and your team. Thank you very much for participating into this program. And I also want to thank all the participants. Thank you so much. If you are interested in getting the recordings, you kindly send an email to o.s.yasiri@gmail.com, and kindly feel free to follow us on Twitter at AWGN14, our Facebook page, Animal Welfare Group Nigeria, and our LinkedIn page as Animal Welfare Group Nigeria. Thank you so much, and do have a lovely day.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.